This week on the Writers Detective Bureau.
Personal ties to a homicide victim, chalk outlines, cops on jury duty, and Chefs for Ukraine.
I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau.
Welcome to episode 119 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality, crime-related fiction. This week, I'm talking about what happens when a detective has personal ties to a homicide victim, the realities of chalk outlines at murder scenes, whether cops can serve on jury duty, and how leaving a review of this podcast can help raise money for Chefs for Ukraine. But before we get into that, I want to tell you real quickly that I put together a free lesson on the items a detective carries every day. I go over some of the key pieces of gear we rely upon and how we use and carry them. The lesson is about 20 minutes long. It's a 20-minute long video, which basically is just me doing a show and tell. I even reveal what goes into those pouches you see on a uniformed officer's duty belt. So if you'd like to watch the free lesson, just go to writersdetective.com/EDC. EDC as in everyday carry. So for the free lesson on crime fiction protagonists' everyday carry, it's writersdetective.com/EDC. This week's first question comes from author Tessa Weggert of TessaWeggert.com, who, by the way, has her latest murder mystery novel releasing today, and it's called Dead Wind, and it's book 3 in the investigator Shayna Merchant series. Congrats on the launch of Dead Wind, Tessa. So Tessa writes, my question is about situations where detectives might be involved in a case that involves a family member or friend. Say if the identity of a homicide victim isn't initially known, but is eventually revealed to be someone with whom the detective has had a personal relationship. I assume that the detective would be removed from the case due to conflict of interest. But what happens if the homicide occurs in a very small community with limited law enforcement resources? Would the detective supervisor bring in a more impartial investigator from a different region? And would the original detective likely keep tabs on the investigation, considering their proximity to colleagues and other detectives? Great questions, Tessa. Once there is a conflict, the bosses will definitely take the investigator off of the case. There are a ton of reasons why this would happen. Assuming the investigators didn't know the identity of the victim initially, they likely don't have an ID on a suspect either, right? And when you have no suspect, that makes everyone a suspect. And logic dictates that you start with looking at the people that knew the victim, which in a very basic and overly broad pool of possible suspects, technically would include your detective. Now, is it likely? No. Is it possible? Yeah, it is, until proven otherwise. And you can bet that a savvy defense attorney will latch on to any issues that arise from having a personal connection to the decedent in a case that you're investigating. Now, this doesn't even begin to delve into the potential pitfalls of impartiality. As the investigative team starts digging into the decedent's personal life, especially when it comes to interviewing people that the decedent knew, ostensibly, they may know or knew the detective as well. So you can see how this would likely start getting very sticky, unnecessarily so. So, since we can predict that, what is predictable is preventable, and that's how the bosses would look at it. Depending on the size of the police agency, bringing in an outside investigator or investigators, if you're going to reach out for help, you might as well get the help you need, right? More than one investigator. Or if your agency is used to operating with one detective on homicides, you might even have that supervisor handle the investigation, which might happen if they had previously been the homicide detective before being promoted. So either of those two things would be a possibility. Here in the U.S., asking for the county sheriff's department to help, or a neighboring police department, or the state police to handle the homicide investigation are fair play when you're dealing with a really small town, especially in remote areas. Now, I know your Shayna Merchant series, Tessa, is set in the remote areas of Ontario, Canada. So if you're thinking about your current series, as far as the story setting goes, in that case, OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, for those listeners not familiar with Canadian law enforcement, would certainly pull in investigators from elsewhere. As for keeping tabs on the investigation, I'm sure, human nature is that we would want to keep tabs on that investigation, but in reality, they should not, at least while the investigation is still active. Obviously, they can't prevent overhearing stuff, and if they have friends that are on that investigation team, I'm sure they're going to hear tidbits. But you can go back. You can bet, I should say, that that detective, that character, will go back and read the case file once this entire case is all over. But the problem with keeping tabs on an active investigation is that A, it isn't yours, and B, you may be tangentially involved through your personal life. That you never know whether you're going to end up as in part of that investigation, or if you're going to end up as a defense attorney witness for something related to the case that at this point you have no idea about, and you're better off not knowing about it. So you're way better off. And frankly, it's much more professional to stay in your own lane and trust that your colleagues will find justice for your friend or your loved one, just like any other friend or family member trusts the homicide detectives to seek justice on their behalf in every other case. Thanks for the questions, Tessa, and for everyone else. Don't forget to check out Tessa Wegert's latest novel, Dead Wind, which is out today and you can find online or through your favorite bookstore. Before we get to our next question, I just need to quickly thank my Patreon patrons for supporting this show, especially my Gold Shield patrons Deborah Dunbar from DeborahDunbar.com, Cece Jameson from CeCeJameson.com, Larry Keaton, Vicky Tharp of VickyTharp.com, Larry Darter, Natalie Borelli, Craig Kingsman of CraigKingsman.com, Lynn Vitale, Marco Carocari of MarcoCarocari.com, Rob Kearns of KnightsFallPress.com, Mariah Stone of MariahStone.com, Aurora Jacobson, and Kaylee for their support, along with my Silver Cufflink and Coffee Club patrons. You can find links to all of the patrons supporting this episode in the show notes at writersdetective.com/119. And to learn more about using Patreon to grow your author business or to support the show, check out writersdetective.com/Patreon, Patreon. Amy Renshaw of AmyRenshawAuthor.com writes, Dear Adam, thank you so much for your help with my previous question about closing a department store after a murder occurs there in 1912. I appreciate the details you shared about photographs and fingerprints. Now I'm wondering, is it plausible that a chalk outline of the body would have been drawn to indicate its position after removal? I've seen resources online explaining that this practice is no longer used, but I'm not sure when it originated or if it would have been used in 1912. Thanks again for your helpful podcast. You are very welcome, Amy. I did a bit of research as well, as I have never seen a chalk outline in my over quarter century of law enforcement experience. Well, other than all the swag gift shop stuff they use over at Skeletons in the Closet, which was the Los Angeles Coroner's gift shop, which sadly closed in 2019. But I mean, who doesn't need a beach towel with a chalk outline, right? Seriously, though, in my own research, which I say with air quotes because it certainly was not conducted with double-blind studies and peer-reviewed. It was, okay, I'll be honest, it was Google. But in my expert Google searching, I did find one pretty reasonable explanation for the use of chalk outlines. Because to me, even if it was 1912, adding chalk to my crime scene seems like it would be potentially more destructive than constructive to my investigation, right? So what could that reasonable explanation be? It's that the media used the chalk outline to convey in a newspaper photo where the body had been removed to kind of show in relation to the rest of the crime scene where the body had been located. Now, I cannot attest to how accurate that truly is. But I can tell you that as I perused the Phototeca archive of official LAPD photos that date from the 1960s all the way back to 1925, and these were photos that were pulled from LAPD records in 2001 for preservation. It's a pretty amazing story. But in all of those photos, and you can check these out for yourself, by the way, by going to writersdetective.com/LAPD archive, and that will take you to this archive, and you can read the story about how they were preserved. But in all of those photos, I only found one image where a body had a chalk outline. And I should mention that if you go to the archive, you will see dead bodies, but none that are overly grotesque. But I do want you to be forewarned. Anyway, I did find one official photo from the LAPD that included a chalk outline with the body still inside the outline. And there are notations to the knife, which was still in the decedent's hand in the photo, and a notation as to where the decedent's head is depicted in the outline. Don't worry, his head's still attached. It's nothing gross. But as far as like drawing this blob of an outline, they point to where the head is as well. And you can see that picture specifically. I will also link to that. You can go to writersdetective.com/chalk, CHALK. And that will take you so you can actually see this chalk outline photo from 1950. And back then, they would handwrite the case number, the date, and the photographer's initials or name right on that picture negative. So 1950 was when this chalk outline was photographed around a body. One other thing I should mention is that I've only ever seen chalk used on asphalt. And assuming your crime scene is still inside the department store, I'm picturing marble or hardwood floors, slick surfaces, something that wouldn't work well with chalk. So that might even be a plausible out on not having to use the chalk in your story. Or it could be a topic of discussion between a couple of characters in a bit of dialogue that you could use solely to frustrate your editor. So long story short, I don't know how common it was or when it originated, but it was apparently done occasionally up until 1950 by the LAPD. Annabelle Robinson asked, can someone who's been found not guilty in a trial be tried again for the same crime? And can a cop not working on the case be in a jury? If so, in what circumstances? Thanks for the questions, Annabelle. Once someone has been found guilty in a trial, no, they cannot be tried again for the same crime. Now, I'm going to save you going all the way back to episode 23, which is when I talked about the concept of dual sovereignty, which here in the United States we have, where we've separated out crimes as state crimes and federal crimes. In California, Section 211 of the Penal Code is the crime of robbery. Robbery is using force or fear, like a gun, for instance, to steal something. You rob a liquor store with a gun, and you're going to be arrested and prosecuted for the crime of robbery, a violation of 211 PC. But if you rob a federally insured bank in California, you not only commit the state crime of robbery, 211 PC under California state law, you also commit the federal crime of bank robbery, which would be a violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 2113. So let's say I, as a police detective in California, sworn to enforce state law, arrest you as you flee this bank, and I book you in jail for 211 PC, and the local DA charges you with 211 in Superior Court, and we go to trial. And lo and behold, the jury finds you not guilty. We cannot try you in a California state court for this crime again, even if we find new evidence later. We had our shot and we blew it. Double jeopardy laws apply here. But the dual sovereignty laws mean that you could still be charged with the federal crime of bank robbery under Title 18 of the United States Code Section 2113. So these are two completely separate legal systems at play. And even though the robbery was one action, it was a state crime and a federal crime that you committed, and each have the chance to be prosecuted. Now, on a side note, as a California peace officer, I am only sworn to enforce state law. I can launch investigations of state crimes, meaning crimes listed in the state codes like the penal code, and make arrests and seek search warrants through state courts. But I'd need to be a federal agent or deputy U.S. Marshal to enforce federal law and seek prosecutions through federal court. So I hope that makes sense. As for the jury question, being a cop off duty, can I be on a jury? Now, it depends on the laws of each state, and it also depends on what kind of cop that I am. What I mean by that is which section of the penal code I receive my peace officer powers from. Here in California, a local police officer or deputy sheriff is granted peace officer powers pursuant to Penal Code Section 830.1. But if I'm Ponch or John from Chips, 830.2 is the section that grants peace officer powers to the California Highway Patrol members. And so it goes through 830 of the penal code. You're going to have 0.3, 0.4, that kind of thing. Different sections for different types of cops. Now, when it comes to jury service rules in California, the California Code of Civil Procedure specifically says that peace officers in 830.1, like I am, are exempt from jury duty in criminal and civil cases. So I do not get to serve on a jury while I'm still a full-time cop. But there are some sections, like if I was a police officer for the California State University Police Department, then for whatever reason, the way that it's written in the California Code of Civil Procedure, I would be exempt from serving on a criminal jury, but I could still be called to civil jury duty. So it really depends on the state and the particular laws. Now, that said, even if I was allowed to sit on a jury, and this may be the case once I retire and I'm no longer exempt under the law, any criminal defense attorney worth her salt would use the voir dire process, that questioning of potential jurors, to dismiss me from their case. Before we go, I would like your help with something. This month, April 2022, Podchaser.com is doing their annual Reviews for Good fundraiser, and it's benefiting World Central Kitchen's Chefs for Ukraine, who are serving hot meals 24/7 to Ukrainians fleeing the war at 8 different border crossings, as well as supporting local restaurants in 12 Ukrainian cities. And the only thing it costs you is a few minutes of your time. When you log into podchaser.com and leave a review on a podcast, Podchaser will donate 25 cents to Chefs for Ukraine. Now, if I reply to your review, which, of course I will, Podchaser will add another 50 cents for each of my replies. Then on top of that, my awesome podcasting host, Libsyn, is matching all of these donations. So that would be $1.50 in donations for every review you leave and I reply. And you can leave reviews for all of your other favorite podcasts as well. So let's do some good together this April and support the chefs feeding Ukraine right now. So to leave a review for this podcast, just head to writersdetective.com/Ukraine. Thank you so much for listening this week. This show is powered by your questions. Send them to me by going to writersdetective.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week and write well.